Good evening, and welcome. You know, over the past few weeks, I've been turning the events that transpired during and after the Greenwold Village fete over and over in my head. And it reminded me of an event of Greenwald's past, another horror. Though this wasn't a severed foot found in a Tombola prize, but a heart found at the butcher's. Interested? Then I'll begin. Everything I'm about to tell you is true to the best of my knowledge. It has been compiled using various accounts and police records and newspaper clippings of the time. So, as far as I can be sure, the complete and total truth. It's a well-known fact that a pig's heart is about as close to a human heart as you can get. There have been whole transplants of pigs' hearts into humans, and the valves of pigs' hearts have been transplanted into humans since the 60s, but the similarities have been noted well before then. However, in 1952, such similarities were likely to be much less well known, which is why it was particularly peculiar when Glenda Ping, a young 12-year-old, pointed to a heart in the butcher's display and rather unceremoniously declared, "That's human, that is." Now, initially her mother took no heed. Well, why should she? Glenda had long been known as the type to embellish life. She'd sneak into the cinema in nearby Forchester and see all manner of horror films that no doubt warped her impressionable young mind. Not to mention the business of the tree stump that she insisted was the Devil's Doorway the year prior. Though, with hindsight, maybe Glenda should have been listened to slightly more. It was only when the butcher responded by backing sheepishly out of the door before bolting like a horse that Mrs. Pink thought it wise to bring it up with the constabulary. Although, I hesitate to suggest that the visit to the police might have had less to do with the heart, and more to do with the fact that the butcher hadn't given her correct change before he bolted off, and still owed her 1 6. Dr. Periwinkle, the latest in a long line of periwinkles to be the village doctor, accompanied the police officer to the butcher's. Upon first glance, Periwinkle knew that the heart was human, noting in his book the heart's trapezium shape, as opposed to the pig's more conical appearance. And, after a brief consultation, the police officer came to the only conclusion that he could. What they were witness to were the remnants of a murder. They set off to find the guilty party, who they assumed must be Mr. Butcher the butcher. What innocent man would run off like that? But how wrong they were. For the truth was far darker than they could ever have imagined. Hazel Valley is a deep cut in a rolling landscape dotted with blotches of villages and hamlets formed of an ancient river now long dried up. And whilst Greenwold was just one of these small settlements, they were all connected by something far more wicked and far more perverse than simple geography. For you see, the whole of Hazel Valley was part of the same political constituency. Practically speaking, the area was perfectly positioned for a little bit of cheeky gerrymandering. But as it was, I imagine the minister who oversaw such things probably didn't even know the valley existed. It was just one of the many areas his eyes flew across when scanning from city to city to city. It could be said that this political neglect had been particularly damaging to the area, but what couldn't possibly be denied was that Hazel Valley was in the midst of a political crisis. shortly before the discovery of the heart had been the culmination of this crisis. Hazel Valley was one of only 2 constituencies with an MP from the English Garden Party. Not to be confused with the England-themed garden party held at the Manor House every summer that celebrated the best of Britain in a very post-war fashion, with afternoon tea and a croquet tournament, walking the line between national pride and nationalism. This was a line occasionally also walked by the English Garden Party, the political one, who prided themselves on not really having politics that consistently fell to the left or the right, but instead went with whatever they thought the public wanted them to say. But what they lacked in principles, they made up for in charisma. Mr. Purple, MP, had stood for the seat on a popular manifesto of protecting the train stations, ensuring the village schools could remain open, and banning the trailers before films at the cinema. A surprisingly popular policy for the rural community. His slogan became trains, training and trailers, and for a while you could hear people chanting trains, training and trailers at any of his village hall rallies, which would sometimes be attended by upwards of 25 people. Purple and the people of the English Garden Party had manufactured a movement. However, where principles are poor, morals may make tracks, and what he lacked in integrity he made up for in corruption. Within a year of the election, Purple had closed 3 of the valley's schools, 2 of the train stations, and had even played his own party political broadcast at a trailer in Fort Chester's cinema. Purple's popularity couldn't have been poorer. The day before the discovery of the heart, Mr. Purple had been on one of his biannual trips to the valley, and, not driving a vehicle suitable for such country roads, his car had broken down, just 5 minutes' walk outside of Greenwold. He realized with fear that he was in dire need of a phone and, given the late hour, likely somewhere to stay the night, stranded in the very valley that despised him. It was well documented in his diaries that Purple couldn't understand this hatred at all. Why should the little matter of him accepting money from and doing the bidding of organizations that worked against the public good make the public turn on him like that? Incomprehensible! He decided he would make his way back into Greenwold, but hide his identity. He'd hardly spent any time in the area as it was, so he wasn't exactly a familiar face. And he decided to make his accent even posher to try and disguise himself. In coming up with his alter ego, he very nearly forgot to remove the large political rosette he had pinned to the breast of his suit, a move that would have given the game away rather disastrously. Though, why on earth he still wore the rosette so long after the election, I'll never know. But politicians are hardly known for behaving rationally. As he started walking towards the town, the majesty of the rolling landscapes very nearly made an impression. But before he was forced to consider anything too existential, he happened across a small bed and breakfast on the outskirts of the town, run by a young woman who lived there with her daughter. They greeted him, showed him to his room, and that was the last time he was ever seen alive. Or whole. So, what has this got to do with the butcher, Mr. Butcher? Well, the police spent months searching for the absconded abattoir associate, to no end. It was surmised that Mr. Butcher had probably escaped to France, where he had family, or perished in the woods. The true details of his fate will never be known, but in searching for the butcher, the police had overlooked a number of vital clues. For example, none of them thought it a bizarre coincidence that Purple should have stayed in Pink's bed and breakfast, and that it should have been young Glenda Pink who recognized the heart. And none of them thought it at all weird that a 12-year-old should be able to note the difference between a pig and a human heart. because Glenda had recognised Mr. Purple when he made his way into the B&B her mother owned. It's hard to know now whether she recognised him when he said that rural communities are the beating heart of England, a phrase he'd used often on the campaign trail a few years prior, and which no doubt sparked the idea in her mind for a fitting fate. Or maybe she recognised him from the sun-bleached outline of the rosette on the lapel of his suit, because he really did never take that political rosette off. Or maybe young Glenda simply knew his face from the party adverts he broadcast before the films at the cinema that she used to sneak into. It's impossible to know for sure. But here are the events of the fateful night as we understand them. After Mr. Purple had gone to bed, Glenda crept into his room and strangled him with her skipping rope. She was superhumanly strong for her age, so rolled the MP's body out of the B&B and into the street. Luckily for her, the village was reliably in bed by 10 p.m. But unluckily for her, she was beginning to realize just how unwieldy a dead body was. Concluding that she couldn't hide the body whole, or shift it much further with ease, little Glenda Pink pulled out the penknife her mother had bought her for Girl Guides, and began hacking the man's body to pieces, a feat she found significantly easier due to his lack of backbone. Just as she was getting to the exciting organs, a man woke up. A man who had long suffered from stress-related insomnia due to his dislike of the fact he believed he was only in his line of work because of nominative determinism. Jasper Butcher. The Butcher. Out of nothing but the pull of intuition, Butcher went to his window and saw Pink hacking at the corpse, covered in blood, and, without a second to even process the scene, Butcher fainted. He often fainted, because he couldn't stand the sight of blood, a fact that further reinforced his opinion that he probably only had his job because of his surname. When Jasper awoke many hours later, he believed he must have dreamt it, not realizing that Glenda had planted Purple's heart in the Butcher's to cast the blame elsewhere. It was only when Glenda made the accusation of, "That's a human heart, that is," the Butcher realized that it wasn't a dream after all. Because what the Butcher ran away from wasn't the reveal of the heart, but instead the young girl he'd seen butchering the politician, young Glenda Pink. The truth of the situation was only discovered many decades later, when, on her deathbed, Glenda called for a vicar and confessed it all. Now, you may think it bizarre that a 12-year-old should commit such a heinous crime because of a political disagreement, but I have to tell you, Mr. Purple was incredibly dislikable. And she had been really banking on him to get rid of those pesky trailers. And in truth, I believe the poor girl never stood a chance. Not after her dealings with the Devil's Door the year prior. Another horror of Greenwold that the truth of only realized many decades later. It's amazing she didn't kill more people. Just Mr. Purple. And however many died during the Devil's Doorway. But I believe that might be a story for another time. Good night.